Not throwing stones at you anymore. Your name's in lights, and I don't wander anymore. How did Glassjaw move on so quickly from their horror-laden post-hardcore debut album, Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Silence? I thought they hated women. It was because they transmuted their pain into peace through their art. It was because they always possessed a maturity that many of their contemporaries lacked, both in their musicality as well as their work ethic. When your music is too heavy for the emo crowd, too eclectic for the nu metal kids, and too mature for both, it's hard to attain the benefits of classification in such circumstances. It is especially hard when people pigeonhole you because of their puritanical musings. However, Glassjaw proved growth was not only possible but obvious through Worship and Tribute, the band's sophomore album. Possible because once you get the rage out, the egocentricity goes with it. Obvious because as you explore the album, it reveals what Glassjaw was all along. When asked about indie bands taking their talents to major labels and the mainstream, the late great Steve Albini said to GQ magazine, "I'm not really interested in participating in mainstream culture. Participating in the mainstream music business is to me like getting involved in a racket. There's no way you can get involved in a racket and not in some way be filthied by it. You're another catalog item, another name on the list of people who are collaborating with the enemy." After signing with Roadrunner Records through their affiliation with nu metal godfather Ross Robinson and his I Am Recording imprint, Glassjaw would learn within 3 years of their signing just how correct Steve Albini was. Crud magazine published an interview with vocalist Daryl Palumbo in July 2002, shortly after Worship and Tribute was released. Daryl initially voiced his disappointment for the limited touring of the debut album, stating that the band didn't tour half as much as they wanted to. For those in the know, some deference could have been thrown in Roadrunner's direction. After all, Daryl suffered from Crohn's disease, and the label could have simply wanted to protect the frontman, a financial asset. In fact, the band had cancelled shows before. But this did not seem to be the case, as Daryl gave a scathing review of the label, saying, "We were on Roadrunner for a couple of years, and Roadrunner was a joke, a fucking joke of a label. They are a miserable fucking corporation that does not bend for their bands, does not give their bands anything, and they're just terrible businessmen. They are a giant joke of a label. They had 2 cash cows, Slipknot and Nickelback, and every other project they had rode backseat to those bands, and then the second that the new Slipknot record came out and didn't go quadruple platinum in the first few hours it was released, they fucking turned their backs on Slipknot. That label just wants instant gratification where it sells its units, and that's a joke. You can't run a major corporation with that as your business strategy." Despite this, Daryl was still positive about Ross Robinson. Ross is a legend. He is the greatest producer in rock history. I'll easily put Ross Robinson, who is one of my closest friends. He is a member of my family and a member in the band. I'll put him right next to George Martin, who produced the Beatles records. Time has a way of revealing things, and sometimes it is unfortunately not flattering or kind. When speaking to Spin magazine in 2022, 20 years after Palumbo's glowing endorsement of Robinson, multi-instrumentalist Justin Beck set the record straight. The original goal was to have a record on Revelation Records, tap out, get a day job, and move on. So when we got approached for the first record, we had a practice space on Rivington Street where Ross Robinson came and signed us on site. That was never the goal. We decided to try it out, and if it didn't work, we figured we'd just go back to school. Truth be told, we were a fulfillment point to close out his last clause with Roadrunner, so the second we signed, he jumped ship. At that point, he was shopping around deals to move his production company, and he wanted to take his own subsidiary elsewhere. So first we were being used as leverage to fulfill a clause, and then we were an equity piece to re-establish his production company elsewhere. So we did pre-production out of my shitty warehouse in Long Island, and then Robinson was putting up the money to record, because he already had a label in mind for where he wanted to take us. He was helping fund the recording, but with an immediate goal to sell it off and start a new production himself. Was Warner Brothers the label that Robinson had in mind? That is difficult to say for a fact. Productions from his I Am Recording imprint were distributed from Roadrunner, Virgin, as well as Warner Brothers. Daryl's side project, Head Automatica, is also on Warner Brothers and bears the I Am Recording imprint, although Ross didn't produce any albums for that band. So I guess it's possible, if not likely. Regardless, when Steve Albini spoke about the corruption of the industry, he also gave some deference to the kids who get caught in the middle. If I had been approached by a big record label when I was 18 years old after I had just made my first demo, I have no doubt whatsoever I would have signed the first thing anybody wagged in front of my nose. I can't fault someone who operates out of ignorance and gets involved with a corrupt industry. They literally don't know any better. I can fault the people who put them in that position. Agents, lawyers, music business professionals who put him in a position of signing away the next 20 years of his life. But the kid who's in those circumstances, I can't really cast any judgment. Glassjaw signed to Roadrunner when Daryl and Justin were about 20 years old. It isn't as if Ross lied about the band being good enough. Clearly they were. However, his fiduciary responsibilities, had he been transparent about them, would have bored the band who wouldn't have even understood what the fuck he was talking about anyway. And I don't know if he and the band ever had a conversation about the state of affairs. But while Ross supposedly had his financial future moving into the green, Glassjaw was nosediving into the red. Remember, Beck admitted to Spin magazine that the goal was not to become hardcore's most inspirational band and to drop 2 classic albums back to back that would redefine the genre for decades to come. Surprisingly. The goal was 1 album on an indie label and to then get a job or go back to school. Glassjaw somehow managed to do both. They succeeded beyond their expectations, but still needed to supplement their lives and families by getting other jobs. Justin. After the first record, I'm like, guys, we all made like $8,000 the entire year. You guys might be delusional and think you're a pop star, but I'm not cut out for that shit. I'll tour when the opportunity is there, but I'm going to go do my day job. So from a young adult balance, it was a no-brainer because my parents taught me well. From an artist perspective, I think it's vital to keep the art as just art. When people go, I'm gonna cut everything else off and become an artist, they inevitably don't do shit because the best art comes out of real life scenarios. If you don't have something at work fucking pissing you off, what's going to push you to emote something? I think it's intrinsic to authenticity that it's coming from an emotional place grounded in reality. That was my take on music. I never took it that seriously. It's the way any band should be conducted and any hardcore punk derived band should be treated. You don't deserve these things. When we got signed, I dropped out of fucking college. We did the first recording and went on the road with Deftones. Then I quickly realized the fucking label sucks. There was no trajectory. I was 21, realizing that I might soon be 30 and just entering the workforce after touring for 7 years and making fucking $8,000 a year. I was like, nah, fuck this, and started my merch company. I told the band that we're not going to be able to sustain this, so I offered everybody a job, but nobody opted in. Beck had a point in that punk and hardcore by extension always stemmed from a working class DIY mentality. One would never be beholden to going big and leaning into the machine. Survival without exploitation was always the ethos, and the band already felt exploited by their label anyway. However, the band is really Daryl Palumbo and Justin Beck surrounded by a carousel of highly proficient musical pals. Manny, Sammy, and Todd left the band to continue doing music in other projects. Hell, so did Daryl. Dude was in like 5 bands that we know of. This is what makes Justin's comments about his 14-hour work days at a factory while working on Worship and Tribute such a damning stab at capitalist-derived art. In his Spin interview, he made a differentiation between artists and performers and sort of shits on the latter. I think bands make the biggest fuck up when they chase the opportunity versus handling the opportunity presented to them, said Beck. There are artists and there are performers. The performer is someone who might leverage some artistic asset or equity they have, but they're pushing it because that's the role they want. They don't want a fucking day job. To me personally, growing up in hardcore, there was a working class ethos. Hardcore was our Sunday night football. Beck was explaining that artists live and breathe their art and are willing to do whatever it takes to get it done. When it's game time, it's game time. But there's preparation for the game that the mere performer does not understand because they just want to be on the field. As he stated later in the interview, he wanted to make what he didn't hear on the radio, a sentiment echoed by Daryl in his Loungecore interview in January 2024. However, performers are described by Justin in business speak as leveraging their assets rather than in a more organic act of having something to say and to capture the sound of the times. Believe it or not, once again, Steve Albini had an astute observation of what Justin was describing here when GQ asked Albini about the success of Sonic Youth once they became mainstream. I think that what they did was take a lot of people who didn't have aspirations or ambitions and encourage them to be a part of the mainstream music industry. They validated the fleeting notions that these kids had that they might one day be rock stars, and then they participated in inducing a lot of them to make very stupid career moves. That was a period where the music scene got quite ugly. There were a lot of parasitic people involved, like lawyers and managers. There were people who were making a living on the backs of bands, who were doing all the work. Had Sonic Youth not done what they did, I don't know what would have happened. The alternative history game is kind of silly, but I think it cheapened music quite a bit. It made music culture kind of empty and ugly, and was generally a kind of bad influence. Albini saw the performers too, the wannabe rock stars who didn't seek to grow the culture, but wanted to siphon fame and fortune from it, the ones who leveraged their modicum of artistry for their 15 minutes of fame. And he, like Beck and Palumbo, was not impressed. As far as production goes, Worship and Tribute took a different approach in a number of ways. Both Beck and Palumbo panned Iwoodcast, not just for the lyrical content, but for the Ross Robinson style of production. Back in 2002, Daryl called Ross an honorary member of the band and even a family member. But 20 years later, he reflected on Iwoodcast as shit, but he also called Worship and Tribute shit. He said there was too little focus on bass, the production wasn't good enough, and that they sounded bizarre, or it featured bizarre sounds. However, he acknowledged that without those albums, he probably wouldn't be making music today. And in his American Musical Supply interview, Justin believed that Ross took Glassjaw away from who they truly were and ultimately doomed the debut album to something he now describes as an unlistenable train wreck. Say what you want about Glassjaw, but at least they are as scathing to others as they are to themselves. Over the years, Justin had maintained his soft spot for Worship and Tribute. He wanted that Don Fury feeling, not the Ross Robinson brain rot. Justin had fond memories of working with Don Fury, saying, "Don approached us during that time, and it was huge for us because he was such a legend. This physical place had so much output. It represented what we grew up on and the music that shaped our young minds. So of course we would schlep in 3 times a week to come here. It was dope legacy-wise and tangibility-wise. It was aspirational for us at the time, and I would say this was where Glassjaw became a real band, or at least where we started sharpening our tool set."
I booked a show for all the building bands at Coney Island High, along with Era Type 11, as a promotional event. And at that show, I met Daryl Palumbo and Justin Beck from the band Glassjaw. Those guys were really into the idea of building records and really wanted to talk to me and have me come down and work with the band. So after a couple of meetings, I decided I would work with the band, and the result was phenomenal. We did 10 demos over the summer of 1998, and honestly, most of them could have been released exactly how they were. They were that good. And I would become their biggest advocate over at Building TVT Records. I could not get the people at TVT to understand what a powerhouse Glassjaw was going to be. I must have been in Steve Gottlieb's office at least 3 times, practically begging to let me sign this band. And TVT was like, we don't get it. I'm like, dude, you don't have to get it. You hired me to get it. Let me sign this band.
But with those days now just fond memories, and moving from their practice spot on Rivington Street, the band moved operations to another rehearsal space in Freeport, Long Island for worship and tribute. Musically, we had the first 5 songs or so well ahead of recording. We had Cosmopolitan Bloodloss, Ape Dust Mill, an unnamed song we called Egyptian, but everyone fucking hated it, a song called Grasper, and a 5th song that escapes me. It was coming together, but it was still very much not where it needed to be. In a weird way, it sounded like a shitty hum, and that's not who we are. So we started losing some of that shit. But I think there was an aspect of letting it sit that was important, because when you sat on songs, there was a comfort to them, even though the voice wasn't quite right yet. I think fucked, as an adjective, is the last part of Glassjaw's formula. No matter how pretty or sultry any of the musicality gets, there needs to be a certain level of sadness to it. At the time, those songs were just too vanilla. I agree with Beck here. For example, if you've ever heard Grasper, it sounds awesome, but there's something astoundingly different. It sounds like an optimistic Glassjaw that really is reminiscent of Hum. But isn't that amazing though? Hum inspired Deftones' White Pony and sorta kinda worship and tribute. Wow. But here's something I literally would have never expected to hear. Justin shared some musical inspiration for this album from an old workmate. My partner at my day job was this horrible jazz nerd, like Chuck Mangione is good, but this was like fucking Michael Franks. Popsicle Toes was my partner's favorite song. So I'd be at work and we'd have musical duels until we found an agreeable sweet spot of Stevie Wonder or someone like that. But I'd mostly be stuck with fucking elevator core music all day. It was one of those things where you're in a fucking factory for 14 hours a day and it gets into your subliminal mind. So there were definitely these aspirations to maybe do like a Chuck Mangione on some stuff. That was the next evolution of Glassjaw. There would have been a trumpet for sure on the next record had we not taken a hiatus. I'm not gonna lie. When I started this channel, I never thought in my wildest dreams that I'd ever talk about jazz, much less the dude that became the soundtrack of my childhood, Michael Franks. Mangione is cool, but for whatever reason, I'd borrow my dad's Michael Franks CDs until he thought he lost them. Popsicle Toes from the Art of Tea, good song, it's alright, but I was more partial to Mr. Blue and St. Elmo's Fire. Okay, back on topic. When creating worship and tribute, much like any other Glassjaw offering on the altar of post-hardcore, this is the creation of the dynamic duo who met as counselors in training at summer camp in 1993, Daryl Palumbo and Justin Beck. People get overzealous, said Beck, and you want to protect certain things from egos and other detrimental factors. I'm not saying between me and him, just in general for any band. If you have other parties that are privy to the journey and are on the bus with you, when those people start fucking weighing in, I'm like, bro, don't get it twisted. We like you. You're cool. But shut the fuck up. Let's just move on. It might not be peachy keen, but everyone's alive and still fucking civil. But you get into those artistic arm wrestles with the supporting cast and it's just like, guys, can we just keep it moving? Do we all need to put a thumbprint on things? Do we really need to move it up a half fucking step just to make you feel like you moved up a half step when it makes no fucking musical sense? It's natural because people want to be involved. But yeah, let's just say the formula for Glassjaw has always been pretty static since 1993, and that's Daryl and I exchanging ideas. Initially, Daryl was optimistic about signing to Warner Brothers, saying, "It's two totally different worlds. I myself am not usually friendly towards major labels. I'm not really an advocate of underground bands with a sub-level mentality signing to majors. But if you find some place that you feel at home, then do it. If you find a label where you can call home and not compromise any of your art or compromise any of your integrity and never have to give in to any big label bullshit, then take advantage of it and do it. We managed to find a spot where we call home right now. Warner Brothers feels like fucking home to us. Unfortunately, because the band would also eventually feel snaked by Warner Brothers and would leave the label, one is forced to recall Steve Albini's words and note the eerie parallels with Daryl's major label skepticism. I mean, even when you consider the title, Worship and Tribute, it seems like it could be about anything. But based on how Justin and Daryl have presented themselves to us and the themes that have emerged throughout the events that shaped the making of this project, the title seems to be inspired by a misguided faith in institutions that only seek to exploit the masses. Whether that be a record deal from a major label or the military-industrial complex, as we will see shortly. And although Justin and Daryl have some mixed to negative feelings about their debut and sophomore albums, post-hardcore fans salivate at the thought of anything Glassjaw has ever done. Eyewitness has its controversy, but Worship and Tribute demonstrated maturity. Not throwing stones at you anymore. Your name's in lights, and I don't wander anymore. The chorus of the opening track, Tip Your Bartender, causes the listener to understand that the vocalist has put the past in the past. Palumbo's internal war is over just as the US is embarking on intercontinental war after the attack on the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. He mourns as he hangs himself with jealousy on a fence post half-mast, while the men in uniform must sober up to attack the guilty and the guilty and the guilty. Moo Empire explores Palumbo's relationship with an addict affectionately named Mr. Shiver, as he seeks to make it over the mountain. As explosive as Tip Your Bartender is, Moo Empire matches it, but adds an instrumental sensitivity that tricks one into thinking that the band aged at least 5 years since their debut. They always had a sophistication, but they grew their sentimentality without losing the sadness that Justin believed to be a key ingredient to their sound. Glassjaw has always been fierce in the face of that which they consider to be immoral or inappropriate, and such sentiments continue in the rip-snorting Cosmopolitan Blood Loss. But I'll be honest, I never unearthed the notion that the song was about abortion rights until someone told me. But also until reading the lyrics with that in mind. But then again, look at the name of the song. It's quite clever. Many faces down the line at Planned Parenthood, and whispers make people nervous because they are self-conscious, because they know how the procedure is viewed. It's you from the airport because your state has banned you from addressing most littlest, the being approaching consciousness that is still in utero. Ultimately, they, the pro-lifers, let you decide, but they want you to choose what they prefer. But once again, the same old cries of Palumbo's misogyny are drowned out once context is applied. But Ape Dust Mill is a different kind of beast. The song could be translated to mean Ape of 2000, a nod to the year that Glassjaw's debut album was released. An album that had a lot of venom for some women, but for one in particular, that left him when he was facing his mortality after a battle with Crohn's disease that was particularly acute for about 2 years after diagnosis. The finesse of this track cannot be understated. In fact, it completely transcends the genre and gives a bit of a nod to Justin's jazz nerd friend, except this song is far more complex and intense than anything Mangione or Michael Franks released. How can you heal if you don't ease back the blame? Highlights Palumbo's story arc towards forgiveness. It has finally been completed. Indeed, if he never let go of his resentment towards the girl he loved, he could never move on, even if he believed that his indignation was correct. Best track of the album? Quite possibly. But Pink Roses kicks fucking ass, man. We're almost halfway through the album and they serve up this intense and cohesive of a track? Unbelievable. Despite being unable to corroborate the following deductions, it would appear this song is a heavy but negative eulogy of Palumbo's father and his alcoholism, which led to Palumbo adopting the straight edge lifestyle. But although Daryl does drink now, it is good to see that he can enjoy alcohol without fearing that he would become an addict. Glassjaw returns to loungecore sophistication with Must Have Run All Day. This might be the first romantic song with no bitterness or vitriol. Instead, it's sweet and sentimental. Palumbo sings, "If it's the last thing you do, plagiarize." And that is exactly what he does for the outro as he lifts lyrics from Mind Over Matters' mindset overhaul. By the way, is he calling it Must Have Run All Day because like the girl was running through his mind all day? That literally just came to me. Okay. And there's still more smoke for American foreign policy when the band blasts into Stuck Pig. Every member delivers their piece of the nail bomb with the machismo necessary to convey warfare and the addictions that help one to stomach the nightmare of a land with two suns. Truly, the track oozes poetry. Some cold nights the windpipes covered in dope. I pray it be covered in a rope. Reading it verbatim really doesn't do it justice. You have to listen to it. It's such a disgustingly discordant track. Just chew the thorn when the midnight gets too long. Radio Cambodia, another song reflecting on warfare, has great lines as well. Actually, the chorus is excellent in its thin metaphor, irony, and wit. It's a shame that our messiahs moved their pawns from different mountains and were left to dance these bodies around the fountain. If a leader preaches worship to the sheep within the valley, who will be riding in a tank that says, "Just married"? The Gillette Cavalcade of Sports is a curious track. Daryl borrows from Frank Zappa, as he's accustomed to doing, but the final line, "Home is where the heart is, on the bus," is tricky to decipher and contextualize within the rest of the lyrics. Is he referencing Zappa's song Wet T-Shirt Night and the ditzy girl who's on stage to win $50 and linking it to why Palumbo sings "This isn't where I found you" in the chorus? Moreover, the line "Life is such a ball, I run the world from City Hall" is from Zappa's song Brown Shoes Don't Make It, a song about a corrupt politician who becomes drunk with power and daydreams about success a minor. Then there's the sportscaster thing. There's a race with his heart in the lead, but his soul is dead last. But at the very end of the song, as the retardando takes effect, is a woman asking when her child will return home and checking to see if they're okay. I feel I have all the pieces, I just need to put it together. Loungecore returns for another banger, Trailer Park Jesus. And shout out to Larry Gorman for his vocal harmonies on this soaring track. Put the needle to the record and hit me with your style is literally worship and tribute, from the music to the album art. Tell the one about the man who dug holes so deep he lost sight of his word seems to underscore this heroic figure who tries to escape hell, who tries to jump ship, but ends up with a burning sow, an unclean animal in Judaism, but is roasted and ready for consumption. The melancholy and slower pace suggests disappointment that the grass really isn't greener on the other side. And finally, we have Justin Beck's favorite track of the album, 2 Tabs of Mescaline. Beck's bass work throughout the project has become the stuff of legend, but here's how it all came to be. I was just in this fucking condominium with a shitty 8-track with some of these tracks on it. Now that I had some recorded guitars and drums, I could start to evolve my bass parts. So like 2 Tabs of Mescaline and 8 Das Mil have all these rolling, looping bass parts that, to me, speaking from my own egotistical, narcissistic perspective based on my contribution, created these mode changes or more depth in the music. All of those moving, rolling parts happened almost at the 11th hour, accidentally, because I'm in a room for 3 weeks and I'm just jamming by myself. And to be honest, this track really could be the best of them all. It features the breathless takes from I Would Cuss, maybe the most spellbinding bridge of any song on the album, which is supported by a punchy chorus and an oddly dynamic intro and verse. I mean, what's not to love? This song also is probably why the album is titled Worship and Tribute, obviously. If I may build on my previous supposition, worship, tribute, crumbling, ripping, and failing, knowing you fit in. strongly suggests a Western conformity to the status quo and a blind trust of institutions that largely just mug you off. Salting the back of a snail forces it to succumb to dehydration. Metaphorically, the youth lose their soul listening to the growing sonic gash with pop sensibilities. Tacit agreement by the masses allows the powers that be to feed you the leper at the petting zoo. And, of course, sexual content will nullify any resistance and kill any rescue. This may not be your favorite track of the album, but it is certainly the most poignant with the most urgent of messages. Glassjaw released Worship and Tribute on July 9, 2002. And with such an electric yet sobering album, it is probably best to recall why it was made. Firstly, it was never supposed to be. But with getting another chance to make something greater and more representative of the dynamic duo that is Glassjaw, the band sought to highlight what other artists had observed decades earlier. The talentless industry rewards the talented artist with exploitation. Nevertheless, the artist must create and be a reflection of the times, to paraphrase Nina Simone. And yet, this is merely one institution under review. The needless wars to bolster defense contractors pre and post 9/11, the gradual rot of human dignity that Palumbo learned from Frank Zappa's sometimes unsettling songs, and one's own clinging to resentment, preventing one from healing, illustrates a grim future. At the time of this recording, it's 23 years later, and the shit show continues as we bow our heads in worship and pay tribute to moral decay. While the ne'er-do-wells continue to terrorize industry after industry in the land of two suns, the talented, the artistic, will have to continue to be the adults in the room. Thus, I leave you with the words of the late, great Steve Albini, speaking again to GQ. When asked to describe his fashion sense, this is what he had to say. I think fashion is repulsive. The whole idea that someone else can make clothing that is supposed to be in style and make other people look good is ridiculous. It sickens me to think that there is an industry that plays to the low self-esteem of the general public. I would like the fashion industry to collapse. I think it plays to the most superficial, most insecure parts of human nature. I hope GQ as a magazine fails. I hope that all of these people who make a living by looking pretty are eventually made destitute or forced to do something of substance. At least pornography has a function. Thanks for watching.